You're listening to The Griffin Show, a podcast hosted by the Cambridge University International Entrepreneurs Club. We're the hosts, Abel, Taha, and Joanna. In each episode, we will be chatting with a successful entrepreneur, founder, and CEO about their story, what they have learned along the way, and market insight of the industry.
Welcome to The Griffin Show. Today, we are kickstarting our December series with Charles Nixon. Charles is a chartered marketer and founder of the Cambridge Marketing College. He has 25 years of experience in marketing in textile, software, telecommunication, and financial services. He has also been a member of the advisory council of the Harvard Business Review since 2010. In 2017, he was recognized as one of Cambridge's 25 most influential business figures. Thank you, Charles, for joining us today, and welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, Taha. It's very nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. So before diving deeper into the podcast, I would like to ask you, what drove you into marketing? Why choosing this discipline?
Well, that's an interesting one. I could probably say that I fell into it rather than actually chose it. I started my career after having a degree in history and economics with a very large company at the time, which was called Courtaulds. And I think I probably ended up blagging my way in on the basis that I had a long conversation with the HR director about what sales and marketing wasn't. And he rather liked that idea, to which he then appointed me to an entirely different role. So I ended up as being what's known as a government relations officer. The aspect there is liaising with politicians and civil servants about government policy and how it affects, in that instance, the textile industry. There is an interesting aspect here because it was what was known then as a multi-fiber arrangement, which was there was a major international arrangement between all the exporting and consuming countries as to what level of textiles would be allowed in with various tariffs and barriers and quotas. Yep. Which really went away over the last 30 or 40 years when the UK became part of the EU and general moods to free trade. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, with Brexit coming along, these ideas of multilateral trade arrangements will be resurrected and marketers will need to get their heads around it. So the answer to your question is that I fell into doing government relations and then from that into market intelligence and understanding the marketplace from a competitive perspective. And then to the proactive side of actually, well, what do you do about it? And moving to places like the International Wool Secretariat and then to what was called Arthur Andersen's, now Accenture, and Mercury Communications to introduce digital communications to the UK. In the mid-80s. It wasn't by design, but I obviously enjoyed it. I was reasonably good at it because people then asked me to do others. So it's a bit of a long answer to your short question there. And I think one of the elements that I would take from that is that whilst understanding theory is very important, a good level of confidence and the ability to take logical decisions is an important part in any career, whether in mine, but also, I believe, in any entrepreneurs. Many entrepreneurs get sucked into the excitement of many activities, but in the back of their brain, they realize that logically they should be doing X rather than Y. And I think a strong logic and confidence in applying it is something that I have learned over the years is extremely important for entrepreneurs as well as businessmen.
So do you think that there's a difference in the knowledge gained between the theory and the literature that we find in marketing and the experience of actually working in a day-to-day basis in the field?
Yes, there is. It's undoubtedly true. The tendency is in many businesses to dismiss theory as being something that they don't see a practical application of. But in most instances, most people's decision-making process is based on what they were brought up with and what they learned in previous lives, as it were, in terms of their education or their previous experience elsewhere. And much of that is based on the previous, what was theory, but has now become accepted practice. So what you learn is very important in giving you a framework. It helps you shortcut many of what otherwise would be very tedious experience or learning aspects. Any model that you look at, and whether it's from Porter or any of the marketing models, are there as shortcuts to help you think about a subject or a problem. So there is a very good marriage of what you read and what has been put down as theory. It's just how you apply it, and you apply it with a level of confidence and common sense rather than rote application.
Mm-hmm. So in your opinion, what is the objective of marketing, whether for a larger organization or a startup?
The purpose of any organization is to serve the customer. The objective of marketing may well be not just to serve the customer with what they want, but it may well be to educate customers. And from an entrepreneurial point of view, that's a very important aspect. When you're looking at innovating into new marketplaces or even existing marketplaces with a new idea, the customer needs to be taken on the same educational path that the entrepreneur has been on. And so marketing is a level of education as well as serving the customer's need. Because many customers, I'll start that again slightly on the basis of when I talk to a lot of startups and say the standard traditional marketing line, well, if you want to know what to do, ask the customer. Most high-tech startups turn around and say the customer doesn't know. And that's quite right. Customers haven't got to the same level of learning or understanding than the entrepreneur. So marketing needs to educate the marketplace. So there's a slight difference between serving and the objective of marketing within a company.
Yeah, that's actually quite an interesting point, because we see today that a lot of organizations are adopting their content marketing strategy and mainly focusing on educating the customer, whether from a blog or YouTube channels, etc. Yep. In a way, that's what we're doing right now in this podcast. We're sharing value to our potential members. However, there's this thing that a lot of people quite hate marketers. Why is that, in your opinion? Why does everybody hate marketers?
Part of that is because many in the consuming marketplaces believe that when they get something that they didn't really want, they would use the term, I've been marketed to, or I've been, the message has been spun. And marketers themselves have some aspect here that they really have to own up to, because marketers, in its worst sense, is really a sales tool, which is just trying to convince people to buy more things. And as we increasingly move now into whether it's a circular economy or a mindful economy, we start to consider that whether or not there is a difference between need and want. And we, as marketers, have in the past sold goods. We have been a communications tool too often in the last sort of 40 years. I think it's important to understand that marketing goes through various phases. And if you look at the history of marketing, initially it was about bringing new products to market. It then became much more about consuming and selling things when we get into periods of mass communications, the instance of commercial television and indeed the internet has just added more channels to communicate. But now I think that marketers are being much more appreciated in their need to understand the marketplace and to help companies find opportunities for growth. Historic imperatives of growth were really driven by population movements. And since 2008, we have seen a lack of economic growth, whether it's population stimulated or consumption stimulated. So the aspect of marketing has now turned much more to innovation and less so to communications. But in answer to your question, I think in many instances, consumers feel that they've been marketed to, and therefore they've been misled.
There's no permission. Yeah, I kind of understand that. I'm gonna come back to the evolution of marketing. With the years of experience under your belt, how did marketing change?
I think marketing has changed from that perspective of being something which was about new products and new ideas. In the mid-19th century, with the Industrial Revolution and the aspect of bringing brands for the first time into the marketplace, we have a situation that has evolved to the point of which most people in the 20th century understood the basis of what was general life. And therefore, in order to get people to buy more of what were competing brands' products, more and more the marketing techniques of communication were brought about. But the revolution towards the end of the 20th century in terms of digital communications, digital products, especially things such as the mobile smartphones, mobile devices, and the digitization of products into services on dematerialization has changed people's understanding as to what is possible. Now we take it as the norm that we have a certain way of operating, whether it's software or devices that we carry around with us, as people would have done maybe 80 years ago, that they would expect that if they purchased something, then they would expect to understand how to use it. Technology goes in cycles. Joseph Schumpeter famously talked about waves of creative destruction every 50 to 60 years, and Kondratiev talked about long business waves. And marketing responds to those changes. So when you get a technology wave, then you have to be in the process of selling the new concepts, the new technologies, and what is capable of being sold. So marketing is about innovation and education. When the technology settles down to the fact that most people understand exactly what the technology is and how to operate it, then it becomes about communications and about trying to get people to buy more of the competing brands. If we go back to mid-20th century, most people who got a new product would expect a user manual with it because it was new and didn't understand how to operate it. But standard products that they had in those days, they would just buy and expect to know how to use it. Same is actually true now. Now, when you get your next iPhone, will there be a 30-page manual as how to operate it? No. When you download your next piece of software, there's no real instructions. You expect it to be fairly implicit and understandable. It's when you start to push the boundaries of technology that therefore marketing needs to change. So I think the element of the way in which marketing has changed is in response to technological changes. There is one other aspect which I think is very important to understand, is that marketing is no longer about constantly getting new customers. Marketing is about relationship building because customers are the lifeblood of any business, and you want to hang on to them as much as possible because there ain't that many new ones coming along.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, recurring customers are always cheaper from a financial perspective than new ones.
Yeah. And there's a new book out which is really quite interesting, which is about reverse demographics, which is about the fact that certainly from the first time in my lifetime, that many of the developed countries of the world are actually going to suffer a decline in their populations. Their population numbers will go down. And that means that we need to hang on to our existing customers much more importantly than anything in the past.
So jump into the relationship building aspects of marketing. How do you think can founders and new startups build these relationships?
I think they come naturally because in most instances, a founder will see the pain in a marketplace, understand a solution to it and propose that in their their first product or service. And their first customers will be their lighthouse customers. They want those customers to buy the product, use its service, and give feedback. And customers in that respect, are growing with the company. So your first customers are the ones you should definitely hang on to. You need to educate them, and you need to ask them for what do they want next, and how would they like it to evolve, and what else should it do that it doesn't do. So the relationship process there, I think, is a natural one to start with. Any entrepreneur and startup wants to get as many customers as he can to start with, but needs to very rapidly think about segmenting those into the most appropriate, I would probably say. So some of them will be very profitable. Some of them may not be as profitable, but are very good in giving insight. And others will be important because they are networkers. They spread the word of mouth. So understand your customers and use them for the various benefits that they're going to give you. And it may not always be monetary.
That's quite an interesting insight. So basically you're proposing to build the startup with the customer rather than with and for the customers. So by gathering their feedback and iterating.
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Now, in the last couple of years, actually, now it's probably been a decade, the term social media marketing has risen in popularity. So in your opinion, what is the purpose of social media in the general marketing strategy of a startup?
So a short answer is that social media is essentially a communications and relationship tool like any other, whether it happens to be offline or online. So social media is a way of selling and sending your information to the marketplace, whether it happens to be through Facebook or through Instagram. But it's also a way of getting feedback. So it is a way of engaging and gaining a group of people and getting them to support through word of mouth. So social media fits many of the tasks that you would not otherwise have given to any other communications media, whether it happens to be exhibitions or seminars or whatever. And especially in today's COVID world, where we don't go out and attend seminars, and we don't go out to exhibitions, and we don't go out to networking. Social media has taken on many of those roles, as well as being just straightforward broadcast communication. But it is more than that, because it does allow us to create communities, which most offline communication tools are passive. They are broadcast at the consumer and don't allow the consumer to give any feedback. So social media is very useful at producing what we used to call closed user groups or product support groups. And this is an area where companies can mine into new product development and evolution. But there's an element that, I hesitate on the basis that the word actually isn't but, it's an and support. So in the old days, if we were to go back to the theory that you're referring to earlier, you would look at something like Michael Porter's value chain. Yeah. And expect that every aspect of that value chain was within the organization. It was within what is known as the infrastructure of the organization. Well, today there is an exostructure around most organizations, and that is the supporting network that customers can give to each other in order to self-support the use of a product or service. Forums on Google or produced a solution to some task that someone wanted to make a piece of software do, or to get a particular aspect of their camera to work, perhaps. So social media is a two-way communications tool, as well as a broadband aspect of selling and broadcasting ideas.
We can see it also with the review phenomenon, that people won't buy a new product or a new subscription without checking the reviews to see what other users have said about it. So yeah, I totally agree about the fact that in today's world, it's not a one-way communication anymore. It's multifaceted. However, going back to the startup condition, let's call it this way, many founders have to deal with a real dilemma since they are limited, since their resources are quite limited. On one hand, they have to build a brand, that emotional connection between them and their customer. And on the other hand, they have to boost sales. In your opinion, should founders focus more on the brand building aspect of their startup, or more short-term marketing, selling, trying to get as much conversion as possible?
The answer to that is different for each company. The most important aspect to bear in mind is that cash is undoubtedly king, and you have to maintain the cash flow to pay whatever bills are coming in. Now, that demand for cash may be satisfied in several ways, some of which may well be funding. It may well be overdrafts, it may well be family, it may well be venture capital or angel funding. Some of it may well be income from sales. And so the entrepreneur has to balance up the requirement for bringing business in and the cash that's needed to keep the company going. If you concentrate just on sales, the problem that you have is that you get known for what it is that you do today and not necessarily what it is that you might ultimately want to do. So building a brand does become a very important aspect of the long-term sustainability of any company. I was talking to an organization 2 days ago who got a very nice idea, but were really struggling to find a way of bringing today's business in terms of making sales. They got lots of wonderful ideas as to what to do for the future, but they couldn't make the company viable in the short term. So the issue, in answer to your question, for them was that they have to sell in order to be viable, in order to get to the medium term, let alone the long term. And so they have to do something to make the sales. But in doing so, then there is the dilemma as to the degree to which you are prepared to prostitute your idea to just the cash, or are you going to still stick to your ethics and your environmental convictions as to how you sell, what you sell, and how much you charge for it? And that's the dilemma for a lot of entrepreneurs, that they wish to stick to their ethical stance, and they have to balance that up with their need for cash. And I would say to nearly all of them that they should stick to their principles as much as they can do. But they've got to balance the cash need in order to get to the long term and be known for all the wonderful things that they aim to do so. Cash isn't just, though, going to come from sales. It can come from other sources.
Cash is king at the end of the day, and it is the oxygen of the startup of any business organization.
Yep.
So, but however, now with the COVID-19, like with the current situation, it is quite hard for startup to get that cash, whether from an investment perspective or from customers. So what recommendation would you give to startup to adapt their strategy to the current situations?
I think they have to be digital first. They have to be thinking about the world as it is, not necessarily the world as they would want it to be. We are online. We're online now, but people are inherently going to stay in terms of wanting the convenience of communications online and the convenience of buying online. So the online world is here. And so therefore your presence has got to be digital, and you've got to think in the digital world. I was reading an article before I came on, which was talking about universities who are struggling for the issue of the fact that they want their students to be present, but they're going to offer them online classes. The hybrid model doesn't satisfy the requirements of either the intellectual ability of people to learn or the aspect of wanting to go to a university and having the social and cultural life that comes with that as well. But other university startups have come to the point of saying, well, actually, I'm digital first, therefore I will provide my classes online. And if I'm going to do that, why do I have to do them in just one country? I can do them anywhere, to anybody in the world. And so we will see significant changes in the educational marketplace as people start to provide a service which would otherwise have been to a parochial local marketplace and in only one particular time scale, now being offered on a global basis. So you asked what is my recommendation? I think you have to think online, you have to think digital first, and you have to make a viable business out of that. Thereafter, then you should, pick and choose those offline elements that will enhance it. So if you're a retailer, you sell online, but then you might choose to set up an exhibition shop or a display shop, which people can go in and see the items. They won't necessarily buy, but they can experience them. And you're not doing mass levels of high street retailing. Your retailing is online and you're supplementing it with the physical aspect in one location or another. To some degree, you could even say that an example, Apple started out doing it with just a few shops, but obviously now has a massive chain. But I think you may well find that many of the successful old brands will retreat to a situation of being online first and then offline second if they're to survive.
So digital first, but in a way, how hard do you think how hard it is for organizations to become digital first, especially since you mentioned retails and there's so many other sectors that are offline first, basically, such as restaurants, etc., the hospitality industry. How can they adapt, in your opinion?
Right. So let's take restaurants as an example. Okay. Historically speaking, if I wanted to go to a restaurant, I'd have to phone up the restaurant and book. From that particular point, then I'd be told that I had a table. I go to the restaurant, I'd have to wait until someone was prepared to seat me. I would then be probably into a fairly crowded restaurant where they'd put more tables than was good for them because they just wanted to get as much money out of the square footage as possible. Mm-hmm. And I would then look at a menu. I would have to wait to catch the eye of the waiter. And then once I'd ordered, they would basically bring the food as they had prepared it and when they had prepared it. Now, if they got it right, it was a nice experience. I then had to wait to catch the eye of the waiter in order to then pay. And as most of us know, that's probably the hardest part on the basis that I've finished my meal, I want to go now, thank you, but you're waiting ages to get someone to pay. Turn it around today, in the digital world, I go online, I book my restaurant, I book my slot. What hasn't quite come about is I'm not allowed yet to book the table that I want, but that will come. So I'll actually have the nice table in the corner that I want because I want to go out for a meal with my wife and it's a nice romantic meal. Mm-hmm. I'll be able to look at the menu in advance. I may even be able to order in advance. But certainly when I get to the restaurant, I will be able to go straight to my table, having gone through any security issues that they might want. I will be able to look at the menu, but I will be able to order when I want. And some indeed, I might even look at the menu online. Then the next thing I know, my wine or my food will be delivered to me. And I can then order my next level if I want to do so. And when I want to leave, I can summon the bill up, pay the bill, through an app or online and get up and go at my convenience, not theirs. So the likelihood is that with COVID as well, we find that the restaurants are now much more spaced out. There's more staff to customer ratio, so you have the ability to have a better service experience. And certainly I can see that a lot of people are commenting that there actually are some significant benefits to the way the world has changed because of the pandemic. And I think that for the hospitality sector, there is a massive potential increase. Certainly they can reduce their staffing levels, they can improve their staff quality, they can give a better customer experience and concentrate on the quality of food rather than having to just turn over as many customers as possible. In any other industry, you take your other hospitality areas, like say the cinema. Cinemas just before COVID had got to the point at which you booked yourself online, you chose your seats online, you were able to book your food and drink, and you turned up and you handed your phone over and someone scanned it. Massive reduction in staffing, reduction in paperwork, and the customer thought it was a brilliant experience because it was much more convenient. And those trends just hadn't permeated in lots of other industries. And the aspect of any crisis is it accelerates trends. So a little bit of imagination, and the answer to your question is, I think those companies that are imaginative, think what the customer wants, will evolve quite quickly. Those that won't, they'll go to the wall. But that would be the norm anyway. You know, we've got several restaurant chains in this country. They've folded, but they weren't doing very well to start with.
To sum it up, basically companies should focus on what matters and make it as convenient as possible using digital technology. That's basically it.
Yes, because the customer buys on three basic premises. They buy on service, they buy on time, and they buy on space. So they will pay a premium for any of those three elements.
You mentioned certain trends. What trends are you foreseeing in terms of marketing, but in general, in terms of technologies?
Okay, this is my crystal ball aspect. So I suppose the first and obvious one is the trend to dematerialization and digitization of those remaining areas that could be and haven't been. The automation aspect becomes an important one to consider. And through that, we look at things like machine learning and the famous phrase of, we'll apply an AI algorithm to it for good or ill. But in most instances, there are areas where technology can perform repetitive tasks much better than human beings. So the trends to automation, digitalization is a massive one which we have to cope with and indeed exploit, because there are lots of opportunities here. I think the other element is that the consumer, going back to your earliest question, has become very savvy. They understand the basics of marketing. If you happen to go through school, you probably get taught some of the basics in economics. So the customer now understands that there are implications to their activity. Their purchases, their consumption has an impact on the planet. And so the ethical side of marketing becomes very important, because you have to consider the impact that you have as a company on the finite resources. If you look at things such as the argument for the circular economies, and certainly in fashion, we need to seriously think about, do we actually need as many t-shirts and clothes as we purchase? So we need to think clearly about the ethical side of business. And I think the other element has to be that we see a change in demographics. The number of people in the marketplace, it may well decline in some countries. The demographic pattern will decline in terms of the ages that are dominant. And it's important to look at your local marketplace, not to take global statistics, because otherwise global statistics will tell you what's happening in America in most instances, or indeed perhaps even in China, but that might not be the same that's happening in Vietnam or in Germany or in the UK. So look at your local marketplaces, but demography is changing. And I think that's an important trend that you have to think about.
You're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is about the customer. And that's quite an interesting insight, the fact that demography is changing. So in your opinion, you mentioned earlier that it's actually reducing.
Certainly in some marketplaces in Europe, the only thing that's kept the population going has been migration. Yeah. But the other aspect, which is an important one, is that people live longer. Taha, you and your colleagues may easily live to 100. And certainly anyone born since about, I believe it's about 2006, has a nearly 60% chance of living to being over 100. Now that has tremendous change in the demand for different types of products, the different types of services, not just for the young people who as a number may well grow, but for the older people or the people who stay longer, but stay active as new drugs come on and new abilities to live a more healthy lifestyle. You may well find that there's a considerable opportunity in the marketplace for people being sold products into their 80s that you would have thought they would have given up when they were 50, historically speaking. Japan is always an interesting marketplace to look at from very many perspectives, but look at the demographics in Japan and look at the way they have responded. I think there are some interesting opportunities to be seen there.
So to make this podcast more practical, if you had the chance to start a business, Charles, which one would it be?
Oh, gosh, to any of my mentees listening, don't take this as a reflection. I would still do what, in one respect, I have already done, which is I would start an educational business. I think education is a fascinating world. I like the nature of the digital world and how that can impart ideas around. And I believe that the human market, the human mind can be satisfied in many different ways. So there's a major marketplace for it. If I wasn't going to do that, the answer to your question would be I would start up something in the space sector. I am fascinated by spacecraft and interplanetary travel, as I suppose most people of my generation were when they were brought up with things like Saturn V and what have you. And I'm not quite sure if I adjust this, you can see there's my model of a Saturn V behind me.
All right, so I have some news for you. Me and you are starting a hypothetical and education business. However, there are two conditions. The first one is that we only have £1,000 for our marketing efforts. And the second one, we cannot use your network, your social capital. So how are we getting our first customers, our first students?
Right. So when you say you can't use your social network, you've got to know certain people out there in the marketplace that have given you the indication that this is a viable business. Mm-hmm. So the first people to go and talk to are those people that you've observed who have a need. There may only be 2, 3, 4. And the first instance, you do the effort yourselves. You don't spend a great deal in terms of marketing money. You don't need to. It's individuals.
So you're right. Since at the end of the day, we're trying to solve a problem. So we need to find people that are actually having these problems and solve it for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, the only issue in most respects that mitigates against going through this sort of process is that people are in a hurry. And so people want to be able to serve 1,000 customers, 10,000 customers, 1 million customers, and therefore they will go out and use funding rounds to build and scale up the business. Historically speaking, companies evolved much more slowly with family funding, and it would just be a case of you would grow as the marketplace understood who you were and beat a path slowly to your door. But it is, in these days, we're all in a bit of a hurry.
You would recommend patience and trying to get the most urgent users that are having these problems. However, in the tech world, everybody has to there's this culture of speed, scaling fast, and trying to dominate the market as soon as possible to mainly stop other competitors from joining in.
Yeah, there is a lot of that because it's a very competitive space. And in most instances, I think that the process is probably correct if you are seeing an opportunity that no one else has done and you want to get in there before other people see it. But it isn't so much dominating the marketplace, it's getting better understanding of it. And with that comes back to your point about brand building, getting the marketplace to understand that you're the one that knows most about it. You don't have to be the biggest in the marketplace to be the most respected. I mean, to be honest, look at the two major universities in the UK, Cambridge and Oxford. You know, they are internationally renowned, but are nowhere near the biggest in the industry. And in most instances, they have taken a long-term approach about how they do things. Doesn't always work. So you have to understand each individual marketplace. But otherwise, yes, I think you understand quite clearly, Taha, about the fact of understanding the marketplace's pain and going out and talking to the customers with a solution. You'll do well.
I know, Charles, that you're also an avid reader. Do you have any book recommendations for our audience?
I do, actually, yes,
All right.
because I usually carry around with me about 2 or 3 books that I'm reading at the moment. And when I get to a class, I like to encourage people to read as widely as possible. So I would recommend to your listeners 2, if not 3 books. Firstly, I would suggest if you are looking at the way in which the economy in the world is changing from an ecological perspective as well as an economic business perspective, I would recommend The Donut Economy by Kate Raworth. Yesterday, interestingly enough, she actually gave the President's Lecture at the Royal Society of Arts, which is available to be viewed again on YouTube. But the book itself is a very good book. It considers a different approach to economics and the fact that the economy has to be balanced with the environmental impact and the ecological issues that business has. Secondly, I'd come back to the point I was talking about in demographics, and there is an extremely good book written a year or so ago called The 100-Year Life. It has been followed up with a book about the 100 years and how to basically balance out your life through that 100 years. But either of them are good. But The 100-Year Life, I'll tell you the author in a minute whilst I remember it and get it off the bookshelf. And there are 2 other books, but one of which I think probably for a lot of your listeners would be very good, is The Future is Faster Than You Think. It's a very new book by Stephen Kotler and others, and it is about the fact that any new idea is usually the amalgam of existing ideas, and how many of these new ideas can come together very quickly by bringing together existing trends. And so I would recommend that. And there are the 2 books that I would talk about. So the new long life is the update on the 100-Year Life, and The Future is Faster Than You Think.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Charles. To conclude this episode of the podcast, if you could give only one piece of advice to young entrepreneurs, which one would it be?
Talk to your customers and keep talking to them.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much, Char, for joining in our first episode of the CIEC podcast. And thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. Do not forget to like, share this podcast with someone who might find it useful, and follow us on all the social media. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me.